Hej och välkomna till Folkets Radio. Den här intervjun med den amerikanske författaren och aktivisten James Roguski förtjänar några brasklappar. Vi hade en rad tekniska problem. Vi fick börja om säkert 10 gånger och det enda som gick att rädda till slut det var en lågupplöst backup-kopia med bristfällig ljud- och bildkvalitet. Dessutom så pratar vi om ett ämne som kanske bitvis kan te sig rätt så krångligt eftersom det Roguski har gjort är att granska hundratals sidor av väldigt krångliga och snåriga textmassor. Men som min pappa brukade säga, the devil is in the detail. Det gäller alla komplexa frågor, men i synnerhet kan också byråkrati och krångligt språk fungera som ett vapen. När det handlar, som det gör här, om hur avgörande makt kan flyttas från suveräna stater till en global spelare som Världshälsoorganisationen, WHO, så kan just de långa och krångliga texterna vara det som gör att journalister och redaktioner inte anser sig ha tid att granska dem ordentligt och inte förstår vad det är som sker förrän allt redan är klubbat och klart. Och om vi får tro James Roguski är det något väldigt farligt som är på väg att ske. Jag hoppas därför att du ändå tar dig tid och lyssnar på den här intervjun. Ytterst handlar den faktiskt om vår framtid och vårt oberoende. Hello and welcome to the People's Radio of Sweden. We have with us a very special guest, James Roguski from Los Angeles, researcher and author. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so we're going to talk about the WHO treaty and the implications that could be for the sovereignty of nations if that will become reality. And before we dive into all this, perhaps you can just introduce yourself a little bit about your background and how you became interested in this topic.
Sure. My background goes back 62 years, so I don't think we want to talk about all of it. But most recently, what happened was, if we go back about 2.5 years, very early on, I became aware of what was really going on with things related to COVID. I had a number of websites that I had put up, a lot of research that I was continuing to do. And in February, I got a notification because I had, I think it was because I had published an article about a drug called remdesivir, commonly referred to as run, death is near, because that's about what it seems to be doing to people. Yeah. And all of my websites got deleted from the internet. And so that caused me to, just reevaluate what I was doing. I ended up opening up an account on Substack, and I decided to start researching things that were more forward-looking rather than what had happened in the past 2 years. And so I found myself going down a rabbit hole of a topic which is referred to as a proposed pandemic treaty. And that's where essentially the World Health Organization seems to be of the mindset that if they had only had more control and more surveillance and more compliance and just, more authority to lock down people and do all that sort of stuff, they think that that's the solution, that they should have all control. And so they have published millions and millions of words, I believe, and dozens of research groups have put forth proposals. And it's frightening to me because they're not evaluating what they did wrong, right? They're just assuming that if they had more control and more power, everything would have gone a different way. They're not talking about essential medicines. They're not talking about early treatment. They're not talking about nutrition. They're not talking about sunshine or, any of that sort of thing. They're not evaluating the negative aspects of what was done these past 2 years with people losing their job and emotional aspects. They're just seeking more control. And so I wrote a big article on it that I published on March 24th. And anybody can go to stopthewho.com and get a quick overview or get as deep into it as you would care to. But a couple of days after I published that, I found a totally different document that made everything there kind of go on the back burner, go on hold, because it was more urgent, it was more immediate, that it was about amendments that the United States had proposed to be considered from May 22nd to May 28th, the World Health Assembly. They meet every May, and that was the time frame this year, that these amendments would be considered to international health regulations. And so that took precedence because it was urgent, it was happening, and the going over the details of the past and what we've done over the past 2 months has been astonishing, because this past week we actually had a phenomenal victory for the power of the people. The amendments that the Biden administration had proposed were just absolutely rejected, and a handful of other countries put forth a separate proposal, which instead of giving more and more power and control to the WHO, it actually went in the other direction, which was very welcome. Very small step in the other direction. Nations have a little bit more control over how they respond to any future amendments, and so it's nice to win a wonderful victory in a skirmish, but the battle continues. The stage we are in right now is they are working towards negotiating and crafting the first draft of the treaty. And so right now it's very nebulous, because you can't say, oh, there's the document, this is what we're talking about, and you could look at each aspect of it. Right now, all there are many, many, many proposals that are going to manifest at some point August 1st as the first draft. And so the time frame is a little bit more relaxed. We had a very harsh deadline, with what came just before. And so what we're asking people now to do is just learn about what these proposals are, because they want to control every single imaginable aspect of society. And I just think that most people are not going to agree with that.
Like about a month ago or something, I started receiving a lot of emails from my listeners, some of my listeners, saying that HWO has this nefarious plan to take over, grab power, and we're going to lose our sovereignty, so that the next time around, when they declare a pandemic, Sweden won't be able to choose their own path like we did this time. We didn't have the serious lockdowns like you had like in UK and in the United States. But if you would just summarize briefly, why was this such a victory? And secondly, maybe just for someone who has no prior knowledge, what is actually HWO?
Well, the World Health Organization was started in 1948, and they literally have their own separate constitution. And you can look at it as starting out maybe as a benevolent organization. The international health regulations go back 150 years. They were originally called sanitary regulations. And if you think back before indoor plumbing and underground sewage systems, people would have a chamber pot and they would toss it out the window or throw it into the gutter in the street. And it was a very unsanitary condition. And, thinking about animals, horses and cows, and, quite frankly, there was a lot of excrement. And so at some point, people realized that walking around with all of this excrement is not a healthy situation. So they had sanitary rules to begin to clean everything up. And so obviously our world now is very different. People walk their dogs and they pick up after, and so when the World Health Organization was started in 1948, there was still that issue in many, many parts of the world, as there still are. There are a lot of people who live in rural settings, and dealing with that sort of thing is important. But in 1969, it changed to become the International Health Regulations, and they had 6 diseases like yellow fever and things like that that they were concerned about, cholera, and in 2005 they were amended again. But the changes that the Biden administration submitted in January had nothing to do with health. It was all about control and surveillance and enabling the WHO to declare an international emergency overriding whatever nation may have been dealing with the problem. So to use Sweden as an example, if there was some kind of bird flu or some animal outbreak or human outbreak, had these amendments passed, the WHO would have been able to ignore anything that Sweden had to say about the situation and just say, I'm sorry, you have an emergency, and the whole world is going to be alerted to that. Mm-hmm. And so that was just a blatant power grab. And along with everything else that was in there, anybody who got a chance to look at that said, this doesn't really have anything to do with health. Mm-hmm. This has everything to do with control and surveillance and power. And so it was rejected. And that's, I think, a wonderful thing. A little bit more control was given back to the nations in terms of how they respond to any future amendments. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that answers the question. There's a lot of information there that, suffice it to say, we stopped them from grabbing that power, and any attempts to do that again won't be until the next assembly in May. And what we're dealing with now is they're trying to negotiate a much, much, much bigger and all-inclusive power grab. The amendments were only 9 pages long, right? The proposed treaty, there's been millions of words written, and it could include, I am curious to see what the first draft looks like on August 1st. Mm-hmm. It could be very brief and just summary, or it could be an enormous, volume of things that just details an attempt to take over every aspect of life. So we're paying attention as opposed to letting them do this in darkness.
And the fact that this first power grab attempt failed, did the activism from people or various countries have anything to do with it? That was pressure?
Well, I believe that, many people became aware of it and the word spread. It's impossible to know, when you're telling somebody who tells somebody who tells somebody, how people get to know and what they know. But ultimately what happened is the delegates from the various countries, especially African nations, countries like India and Iran and Russia and Brunei, they, at the very least, took the time to read the amendments and spoke up about it and spread the word. So, it's a victory, however it may have happened.
Yeah. Looking forward then, so we're waiting to get the draft. How much is bureaucracy in itself sort of a weapon that sort of things are so complicated and so bureaucratic that people don't even, I noticed that from trying to as a journalist, when you try to scrutinize vaccines, for instance, the whole bureaucracy around it is so complex and it's so many instances. So most editors and newspapers, they just say, well, we don't have the time to go into all this. What about this kind of treaty? Is it also veiled bureaucracy?
I guess actually that's where I may actually provide a service. Okay. Mm-hmm. What I have done for years is delve into very detailed, complicated, whether it's medical journal publications or legal things like we were dealing with now. And I think I have the ability to translate complicated, jargon-filled medical and legal things and turn them into something that people can understand. And so what it came down to with what we were dealing with this past time was, even though there's thousands and thousands of words, we were able to get people to focus on the fact that they were removing 10 words from the regulations, which would transfer authority and control from each individual nation to one person. And it's surrounded by all kinds of complexity, but we were able to get people to focus in on, well, that doesn't seem like a good idea. It doesn't seem like giving up national control for 194 nations and giving that to one person. Okay, and so what's going to be coming is my best understanding of what's going on with the pandemic treaty. Is it will be unbelievably complicated and all inclusive, but it actually boils down to: do you really want just a few people to be in control of the entire world, or do you think that's a bad idea? And I could imagine that a pandemic treaty, or let's just say a treaty to rule the world, could be crafted in a way that distributes authority and distributes power and makes people in their location have more authority over their own lives, right? And I could see myself supporting something like that, that gives people more independence, more freedoms, more control over what decisions they make. And I really don't think that that's what these people are intending to craft, okay? They're going in the totally other direction. Their belief is that they know better than everybody, and so they should be able to decide what everyone does all around the world. They literally have a phrase called One Health, and they want to have essentially universal control over everything. It's the one world government that everyone's been talking about, and they've gotten to the point where they think that the World Health Organization is the place to craft that because of the fear that disease engenders in people.
And what is your understanding? Just to say, it's a few people. Are they just sort of frontmen for something else? And what are the forces behind all this one world government?
That gets into an area of speculation, okay? Because it's all so nebulous. And so what we can point to is there are people who are listed as members of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. And so that's a little bureaucracy. It's a working group within the World Health Organization. And they have 6 co-chairs or basically lead members of the group. And so their task is very clear and very public. There are proposals coming from all over the place. Many, many groups with obviously lots and lots of money have put forth proposals. And this intergovernmental negotiating body is tasked with organizing all this information and writing the treaty. And so to speculate on who may be controlling or influencing that working group, boy, we could be here all day in terms of who might have an influence on that, because there are dozens and dozens of very well-moneyed groups who are presenting proposals. And so it's the who's who of everybody, all right? One of the groups, I can't remember the CEO's name, but I remember her title. And her title is Dame Commander of the British Empire. Now, as far as I know, that's kind of like just the female version of someone who's been knighted, But, it's just kind of an indication of, we're dealing with aristocracy, we're dealing with money, we're dealing with power, and people who, it's not enough that they have all the money and all the power that they already have. They want absolute control over everything because they just think that they know better, and that their one idea, their one health is what everybody should do. And one size fits all, everybody should obey a central authority. That's not my idea of freedom, and that's not my idea of efficiency, actually, because a much more secure, a much more stable, a much more efficient system has desegregated authority, desegregated decision making, or I should say decentralized is the word I really meant to use, where local people make local decisions based on local conditions. And to have a one-size-fits-all across the entire world, that's just ego and hubris, and it's a power grab, pure and simple. And if people look at it, it should be obvious, and we're just trying to get people to pay attention.
So you have mentioned that one possibility, one solution to this, radical as it may sound, would actually be for countries to leave the WHO.
One of the things that is obvious once people look, right? And in this past week, I came upon one of their documents. They had a very simple pie chart, and there's 194 member nations. Each of them get one vote. And there was about 250, they refer to them as non-state actors. Some people call them non-government organizations. Some people call them foundations or nonprofits or what have you. And so the World Health Organization gets, anybody can correct me on these numbers. These are, ballpark figures. But in terms of the yearly dues that are paid by the nations, approximately 25% of the money comes from the member nations. Some member nations donate more money. I believe Germany is actually the greatest benefactor that they have right now. But the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi and many, they give enormous amounts of money. And so anybody can look at that and go, well, the people who are donating money are the ones who are, or the organizations that are donating money are the ones that are going to have influence. And in terms of representing the will of the people, right? If you just look at the whole concept, China, India, Brazil, United States, Indonesia, Japan, and any other nation that has a large population, they get one vote. Whereas very, very small nations get one vote. And so in terms of representing the people on the planet, it essentially really boils down to the people who donate money to the WHO are the ones who are influencing their decisions. And if you do us, not that doing searches these days on search engines is the best way to find information, but if you just search for WHO corruption, you'll be there forever, looking at what accusations have been made. Follow the money. The decisions follow the money.
And how can a country leave the WHO?
I can speak with detail about the United States. We joined on June 14th, 1948. President Truman at the time signed a joint resolution from Congress. And the fifth section in that resolution said very, very clearly, we're happy to join. We want to help improve, the health of the world. But it doesn't matter what the WHO says. Any regulations or anything in their constitution does not obligate us to do anything if we don't want to, right? And so it's a completely voluntary organization, and there's a process by which, President Trump started that process, but he started it too late, and Biden reinstituted it. It's a year-long process. You essentially notify, your Secretary of State or your foreign minister notifies the WHO that you wish to leave. You stop paying your dues, right? And out you go, because it's a voluntary membership. And so the hypnotic nature of the media's presentation of what the WHO actually is has gotten people confused. They make recommendations, they share information, they take money from a whole bunch of different organizations and they do what they do with it. And each country has their own analysis. I mean, there are some countries who donate or pay small dues, and maybe they see a lot of benefit or perceived benefit from whatever the WHO may do in their country, because the WHO does employ people. And, in countries that are impoverished relative to other nations, the types of jobs that the WHO brings in, the people who get those jobs, I'm sure think that they're wonderful. But the net result is, you have to look at it. Are their policies actually increasing health, or are they just funneling money into pharmaceutical manufacturers and vaccine manufacturers? And if you actually really look at what happens, the levels of health often go downward. And so the process for leaving is essentially really based on political will. If a nation wants to leave, they just say, hey, we want to leave. And now, easier said than done, but the process is simple. And so the political will to identify that the membership in the WHO on balance is very, very negative is going to be dramatically altered by their obvious attempt to just gain complete control over every aspect of society. And if people are not paying attention, they're going to keep trying to do that. And if people start paying attention and they see what is really going on, that they're not improving health, they did not do a good job with the past 2 years, the advice that they give or the recommendations that they make are just that. They're just recommendations. And do we really want to pay billions and billions and billions of dollars for bad advice? And, they spend more money on travel than they spend on individual diseases. And so, actually reevaluating what is going on with the World Health Organization, I think their attempted power grab during this past assembly and their ongoing attempted, not just power grab, but attempt at worldwide domination should trigger a very serious reevaluation as to whether or not they should even exist. Because any nation that surreptitiously attempts, any organization that surreptitiously tries to just take sovereignty away from each member should be seen in the light of day as an organization that doesn't deserve to exist anymore.
So when you have been networking with activists from other countries as well, has it been encouraging for you to see that more and more people are awake to this?
Well, one of the things that I do, and I'm in the United States, and I realize that in other nations, the code numbers are different. For the United States, it's +1, but I've always given my phone number out, and my phone number is 310-619-3055. And, people have apps like Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever it is they use, or text message. And I've just gotten phone calls as we got connected, through activists that I actually knew when they were in Ecuador, and I believe they're in Sweden, and that's how you got connected. Yeah. It's been amazing and wonderful to see how many people around the world are concerned and are speaking up. And the victory that we had last week was, astonishing, quite frankly. And so I'm very, very optimistic. And it's just a question of people are so overloaded with information, and they're so overloaded with just life and surviving and dealing with these crazy mandates and regulations and stuff. People want more freedom. They don't want more control being put down on top of them. And it starts with understanding, well, what is it that they're trying to do to take more control? If you learn about it, then you have a chance to stop it. And I honestly think this is going to be very straightforward. If people look at the information, they go to stopthewho.com, watch a couple of videos, and see how just ridiculously they are overreaching to try to take over the entire world. I believe we can stop them. And any organization that's trying to do that, you have to call into question whether or not you really want to be associated with them at all.
I watched some of your other interviews, and you talked about the sort of battlefield of the Third World War is the mind, and that's one thing I think has become very obvious during these 2 last years, that none of this would have been possible without an extremely propagandistic mass media and also social media bubbles. So that even though most people, you wouldn't think they would want to have mandatory vaccines or global control, power grabs and all that, But it's been so effective to demonize people who are not taking the vaccines as being anti-vaxxers and sort of even dangerous spreaders of disinformation and so on. So one can really wonder, do we really have a majority of people in the world who are firmly against this, or is it sort of, are people being sort of mind controlled into believing that this is just all a conspiracy theory trying to, you know?
Once someone has been programmed to believe whatever it may be, okay, it's a very difficult thing to talk to them about that topic without triggering, you know, an emotional response.
Yeah.
And so that certainly exists. And even in the face of, you know, factual information, even in the face of, you know, people dying and suffering and all of that, a hypnotic suggestion is very powerful. It sticks around, okay? What happened this past couple of months is we were talking about something that people had no prior knowledge of. You know, very few people had read the 84-page international health regulations. Most people were like, what are you talking about? Okay. So they were actually able to see it clearly. They didn't have a preconceived notion. And I believe for most people, if you talk about, hey, there's this treaty that they're trying to pass, or at this point anyways, draft and promote, and it's going to give a small group of people absolute control over every aspect of your life. Do you think that's a good idea? Right? Most people will be like, well, I never heard of that. What are you talking about? And right now, it's a little bit difficult because the treaty does not exist. We're so early, they have not even drafted the darn thing yet. And so all there are many conflicting and confusing proposals, but all of them are headed towards centralized control where one source of power dictates to everybody, you know, what everybody's going to do the same thing. And on one level, maybe there are people who think that that's a great idea, and so be it. But I think the vast majority of people, when they learn about that, they'll realize that, well, wait a minute, what works in Sweden may or may not work in Ecuador. How maintaining individual people's health relies on doctors who treat that patient as an individual. And so, you know, this is a turning point in history where we're going to go one direction or we're going to go the other. And, you know, I'm pretty clear which direction I think it should go. And I really think that the vast majority of people agree with that. They just need to be made aware that this choice is on the horizon.
Yeah. There's a great quote in one of your articles from the French philosopher Montesquieu. I just want to read it. There is no greater tyranny than that which is perpetrated under the shield of law and in the name of justice. So that's what we're up against.
When people start to read, you know, some of this legalistic language, you know, things like are going to be in this treaty, there's a way of crafting the words so that you read it and it sounds wonderful. But when you actually understand the secondary meaning of the words and how they've been redefined, and you put yourself in a position of, you know, how would I take advantage of these, you know, treaties or laws or rules, and you realize that they're crafted in a way that people who want to abuse the system, it's all built into the wording. And so that kind of linguistic deceit is just dripping in these documents. It's like, you know, when you recognize what to look for, you just go, oh man, if I wanted to take advantage of these documents, it's built in that it's easy to do, where someone reading it would go, oh, it sounds really wonderful. And so if you're alerted to that ahead of time and you realize that this is how they craft the language and this is how they've redefined terminology, then you see it for what it is. And I'm very confident that we can get people to understand that these people are pretending to want to craft a document that is just so wonderful Okay. And, I've watched science fiction shows, Star Trek, or, do you want Star Trek or do you want Mad Max? Do you want Blade Runner or do you want The Matrix? Right. And so certainly we can end up with 1984 or we can end up with some type of a utopian society. And when you look at what the folks have done that are crafting this, they just simply want control. And in my book, control should be very local, close to the problem, not uniform, not just all one size fits all. And they are clearly preaching, one health, one government, essentially one world order. And so anyone who thinks that the one world order is a story or a conspiracy theory or whatever, just listen to their words. Yeah. They talk about one health. They talk about a one government approach. Essentially, they have a one-size-fits-all solution. And I just don't think that the vast majority of humanity is going to accept that.
Yeah, you mentioned George Orwell's 1984. I get to think of this term newspeak.
One of the articles on my Substack account is exactly that. It's called Newspeak, because on the very last day of the Obama administration, they published an 80-some page document in the Federal Register, and a couple of pages of it were just redefining words. Mm-hmm. And so when you start manipulating the language to that effect or that extent, you have to question what the motives are. Yeah. And so it's really not about health, because if someone was really concerned about a person's health, it would get down to the level of the person where they could work independently with a healthcare practitioner and they get to decide what's right.
It's gone.
And so in order to get to the information, people can go to stopthewho.com or give me a call at 310-619-3055. It's in the United States. I believe the country code is +1. You can use WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal. And I just encourage people to learn as much as they care to learn about what they're planning, and realize that if you think the whole world should be fit into a one-size-fits-all solution to health, then maybe you are in support of the treaty. But if you think that you should have control over your own decisions on a local basis and a personal basis, then this treaty is definitely not anything that you want to have any part of.
And on a national level, so what are you going to do as an American? Are you going to try to approach the Biden administration and make demands that they don't sign this, or how do you sort of struggle nationally?
The signature about this is off in the future. They're talking 2024 to even approve it. And this isn't about politicians and asking and begging politicians to do something for us. This is more about activating regular people, informing them directly, bypassing the media, so people realize that they need to be the media, because the only reason that media has any power is because people watch it and they watch the advertising. And I learned long ago, I had somebody very rudely tell me that their television station doesn't care about their viewers. Their business is operated by the advertisers who pay the bills. And so if the viewership changes and moves their attention away from the mainstream media, they will crumble in a heartbeat, because the advertisers will realize that they're just wasting their money because nobody's watching. And so if you continue to watch, CNN, MSNBC, the BBC, whatever, you're being propagandized. And if you start to make your own media, as you are, okay, and share whatever information it is you feel you should share, those media conglomerates will crumble into dust, because the power of the people is based on your attention. If we get our fellow humans to stop paying attention to the propaganda, it will not remain. Now, you have to be careful. There's a lot of people who say a lot of things, and it's hard to know what to believe. But when you look at what the mainstream media has been doing to us, it's impossible to believe what they're saying. And so there's a bigger goal of creating a whole new infrastructure of how information, fact checking and censoring and all that sort of stuff. If people cannot see that they're trying to hide the truth from you and lie and just deal with deceit and fake information that comes down from, one authoritative source, I think people are smarter than that, and they've begun to wise up. And every time somebody like yourself does a podcast or a little TikTok video or whatever it may be, you put your own truth out into the world, whatever that may be. And if it resonates with people, it'll find traction, and it'll take the attention away from the media that is really causing many of these problems.
James Roguski, it's been an honor to have you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.